Taurus, the week of July 26th to August 1st, 2026, is a genuinely major week in the sky, even though most of it is happening in houses you don't watch every day. Saturn stations exactly retrograde on July 26th at 14 degrees Aries, joining Neptune in your 12th house of rest and the subconscious, while the lunar nodes shift axis this same day, moving into Aquarius and Leo. The week builds toward a full moon in Aquarius on July 29th, conjunct Pluto, sitting exactly opposite the Sun's rare conjunction with Jupiter in Leo. Several of the year's biggest astrological storylines are converging, almost on top of each other this particular week, and very little of it is loud or obvious on the surface. It's the kind of week that works on you quietly, rather than announcing itself. Let's go through what all of this actually means for your money, your relationships, and your energy, using the real sky, not generic guesswork. Money and career carry real weight this week, building toward a genuine peak on Wednesday. Mars in Gemini is sitting in your second house of money and values right now, which gives you a decisive, no-nonsense energy around practical financial decisions. This is a good week to make a call on a purchase or a bill you've been putting off rather than continuing to deliberate. Mars here also sharpens how you talk about money. Conversations about pricing, raises, or splitting a cost tend to go better this week when you say the number plainly instead of hedging around it. Since Gemini energy actually rewards directness in a way your usual instinct to soften things doesn't always allow, this is genuinely useful if there's a negotiation on the table this week, a salary conversation, a rate you've been afraid to quote, a bill that needs splitting fairly. Say the number first and let the conversation build from there, rather than waiting to be asked. Early in the week, while the moon sits in Capricorn, an unrelated but useful influence, use Sunday and Monday for the practical groundwork paperwork, a budget review, anything administrative that benefits from a steady, disciplined mood before the bigger event lands midweek. But the bigger story arrives on July 29th, when the full moon in Aquarius lands in your 10th house of career and public standing, conjunct Pluto, and opposes the Sun-Jupiter conjunction sitting in your 4th house of home and family. This is a classic work versus home culmination, and it's rarely subtle when it lands this exactly. Something related to your public role, a recognition, a decision, a piece of feedback, may come to a head this week, and it's likely to pull directly against something happening at home or with family at the very same time. Pluto's presence at this full moon adds real depth and intensity to whatever surfaces professionally. This isn't likely to be a small, forgettable moment, even if it doesn't look dramatic from the outside. Don't treat this as an either-or crisis. The full moon is illuminating a balance you've been carrying for a while, not forcing you to abandon one side permanently. Notice which side has been quietly neglected this month, and give it attention this week rather than after the moon has already passed, since full moons tend to resolve fastest when you act on what they reveal instead of just absorbing the feeling. Relationships get genuinely interesting this week, largely thanks to an exact Venus-Mars square on July 28th into the 29th. Venus in Virgo is sitting in your 5th house of romance and creative self-expression, while Mars in Gemini sits in your 2nd house of money and values. And the square between them creates real tension between what feels romantically or creatively fulfilling and what feels financially sensible. You might find yourself wanting to spend more freely on something that lights you up, a date, a creative pursuit, a gift, while a more practical voice pushes back hard. Neither voice is wrong this week. The square is simply asking you to notice the tension honestly, instead of either overspending to chase the feeling or underspending out of guilt. If you're partnered, this can show up as an actual disagreement about money tied to romance or leisure. Name it plainly rather than letting it simmer under the surface until it comes out sideways as irritation over something unrelated. If you're single, you might notice the same tension internally, wanting to invest in a budding connection, while a cautious part of you keeps counting the cost. There's also a quieter relational thread running through the full moon we already discussed. The South Node sits in Leo, your fourth house of home and family, exactly opposite the Aquarius full moon in your career house. Old family patterns or an old sense of duty toward home may resurface this week, asking to be examined honestly rather than automatically repeated, especially if a career-related decision is forcing the comparison. This might show up as a conversation with a parent or sibling about expectations, or simply an internal reckoning with how much of your current path was chosen versus inherited. Family conversations that happen this week, particularly around Wednesday, carry more weight than they might on an ordinary week. So don't be surprised if something said in passing lingers with you longer than usual. If an older family narrative about what you're supposed to be doing with your career surfaces, this is a good week to gently question it rather than simply absorb it as fact one more time. Energy and health are where the deepest, quietest work of the week lives. Saturn stations exactly retrograde on July 26th at 14 degrees Aries, joining Neptune, already retrograde there in your 12th house, the zone of rest, the subconscious, and everything you don't usually say out loud. A planetary station isn't a light, passing moment. Saturn appears to hang nearly still in the sky this week, and that stillness presses its themes harder than an ordinary transit does. With Neptune already sitting in the same house, expect this week to bring a heavier, more insistent version of the fog and fatigue we've touched on before. Not a dramatic collapse, but a persistent sense that something inside you needs real acknowledgement rather than another round of pushing through. Dreams may feel more vivid or more disturbing than usual this week. If something unsettling surfaces at night, treat it as information rather than something to dismiss by morning. Physically, lean on movement since your ruling planet Venus and Mars both favor action this week, but pair that movement with actual quiet time afterward rather than immediately filling the space with more tasks. This is a week where rest has to be deliberate, not just the leftover time after everything else is done. Given that Saturn's retrograde here lasts until December, this week functions less as a single event and more as the opening checkpoint of a much longer stretch of inner reckoning. So whatever tiredness or quiet grief surfaces this week is worth taking seriously rather than assuming it will simply pass once the week ends. You don't need to solve it by Sunday. You just need to stop treating it as background noise you can outrun with enough activity. There's a longer story underneath this single week worth naming briefly. The lunar nodes shifting onto the Aquarius-Leo axis this same week sets the tone for roughly the next 18 months. Not just these 7 days, and it lands specifically across your career house and your home house. The broad instruction is that your growth edge going forward involves publicly stepping into more responsibility and visibility. Your 10th house, even if the pull towards staying comfortably rooted at home, your 4th house feels safer and more familiar. This week is simply the opening note of that longer chapter, not the whole story. So here's where this actually leaves you, Taurus, heading into August. The full moon hands you a real choice between career visibility and home comfort, without asking you to abandon either permanently. The Venus-Mars square asks you to be honest about money tied to romance and pleasure, rather than swinging to either extreme. And Saturn, joining Neptune in your 12th house, is asking for real rest, not performative rest, as this new retrograde chapter begins. Pay attention this week to where your energy actually goes, not just where you think it should. If this reading resonated with you, hit like and subscribe. Default text: